Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Hi, my name is Tony Bodoh. Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. I'm here with my co-author and friend, Betsy Westhafer. So I am the CEO and founder of Tony Bodoh International, and it is a customer experience consulting firm. Betsy is the CEO and founder of the Congruity Group, and she focuses on customer advisory boards. And so there's been an interesting dynamic and collaboration between Betsy and I over the last several years. It really started, I would say, back in 2018, when one Saturday morning, early March, Betsy called me up and said, let's have a conversation. And she was telling me about how she's been working on these CABs, these client advisory boards, where the C-level executives get together and really understand what's happening for their business clients. And they bring in the C-level executives of their clients, and they have these great roundtable discussions. And she's talking about how they integrate the work that they do, the findings as they listen to their customers down into their organization, and how that changes the relationships. And I start sharing some of the work that I've been doing really from the bottom up, from the B2C side primarily, and working with the line level employees, working with the consumers as they're talking right directly back to the company, and how I filtered that up through the organization to the CEO. And so as we're in this conversation, I realized we have a lot of synergies here. We really work from very different perspectives, but we got some great synergies. And at some point in there, Betsy said, how about we write a book together?
Yeah, and as true as that story is, the way you told it, it was really an off-the-cuff kind of comment that I was making. And you know what I also remember, Tony, that's so funny, we had scheduled a half an hour call. I do remember that. And about an hour and 45 minutes in, I just flippantly said, oh, Tony, we should write a book together. And your response was, okay, let's do it. And you had written books before, I had not, so it was a little bit daunting for me. But I also recall you said, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's go heads down. Let's get this done. Let's really put out a good piece of work, which I think we both are quite proud of the way it turned out. And so I'm very grateful, honored, and humbled to be partnering with you on so many projects. We've got a lot of things going on. This podcast, we are starting to do summits and webinars and all kinds of fun things around this brand of the book, Profitability, the revealing story of why companies succeed, fail, or bounce back. And for anybody listening on audio, it should be noted that profit in profitability in our book is spelled Prophet, meaning forward-looking, looking out into the future, using your customers to help you figure out what it's going to look like in the future. So this is kind of the spin we put on the book title. And so we're just very excited. The next step for us as two professionals with synergies in our businesses is launching this podcast. And we're very excited and happy to bring you this show and to bring you the knowledge that we're gaining just from the interviews we've already had. We have learned so much, and we know that the listeners will too. And we're just very excited to be able to bring you the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Absolutely. And as you talked about the book, Betsy, one of the things that really strikes me is that we had so much information already that we both came to the table with. We've been doing this for collectively probably 35 years or something like that at the time we had this conversation about the book. And so as we began to organize our thoughts and our ideas, what really came out of it was that companies are pretty good about listening to their customer in the moment, right? In the reactive way. But the challenge that the executives were having, both the executives you were talking to at the client advisory boards, the executives I was working with as we filtered the voice of the customer back up through the organization, is that it wasn't about tactics. They wanted strategy. They said, how do we position ourselves for the next 3 to 5 years? How do we see the future and where we need to go? Which is how actually you arrived at the idea of profit using PROPHET, if I can spell it right. And you came up with that idea of how about we play off that? And then we filled the book with plenty of stories about how companies that succeeded had really listened to their customer. They really got to know their customer. And the companies that failed did not listen to their customer. They made bad decisions because they weren't paying attention to their customers. And then there's companies that bounced back where they went through a period of not listening, but when they started listening, their companies really took off again. And so it's so interesting to me that we wrote this book. We've kind of talked about what do we do with it now that the book's been out there for about 2 years. Still very relevant information, but we wanted to update it because the world has changed quite radically in the last 2 years. There's so much has happened. And so that's one of the reasons that, and as we talk to these executives, I think everyone we talk to in the podcast has really been able to share how they see the world has changed. And more importantly, our focus is really around where's the world going? Where's your industry going? Where is this idea of listening to the customer going? And we're not just talking to consultants in the customer experience space or software developers in the customer experience space. We're talking to CEOs of a variety of companies and chief marketing officers of a variety of companies. So we're talking to the people who actually have to listen to the customer, not those who are trying to sell you something and to get you to listen to the customer. So I hope you find this really valuable as we go through these interviews.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. And it's about deep listening too. You know, it's not just, oh, they like this feature, they like this function. It's deeper than that. And I can recall a story. One of our customer advisory boards, we were showing a whole lot of information. Our clients were showing the customers around the table, and these were all CIOs for the most part, showing them feature and function. And one of the customers said, you know what I really want to know about? I want to know 3 things. I want to know how you're going to help me keep my job. I want to know how you're going to help me stay with my family on the weekends and not have to work and worry. And I want to know how you're going to help me sleep at night. That's what I want to know from you. And so what we're talking about this in the Really Know Your Customer podcast, and that's why we named it that, is we really wanted to get to this deep, really know your customer. You know, we're talking about things that are human. We touch a lot on that in the book, the human aspect of knowing your customers, knowing where they're going so that you can get out in front of them and be ready when they get there. And how do you do that? The only way to do that is by talking to them and getting to really know them. So yeah, we're excited about the guests we have on. And I think that our listeners are going to get great value from listening to the various people that we're interviewing for the show.
Yeah, and what stands out to me is something that one of our guests, Scott McGowan, brought up. He talks about culture and about employees. And you just made a comment there, you know, your client, when they were listening to their customer, they said, we want to know how you're going to help us, you know, spend time with our family, sleep at night. No, it's the personal things that matter. And when Scott was talking to us, he was talking about how they had done this SWOT analysis and they went out to their clients and they thought they knew what they did really well. And when their clients came back to them, they said, actually, the thing we like most, the thing we value most is your responsiveness and the relationship you have with us. And Scott was kind of blown away by that. He was shocked by that. Not that he didn't think that it was a big deal, but he was like, maybe it's the technology or maybe it's the way we do this or that. But when it came back to that relationship and that responsiveness, it really cemented what they were already doing, but didn't realize that that's really what mattered to the customer. And so once he got to really know their customer, it allowed him, and he talks through some of the changes they made in their organization and how they're looking into the future. And when I think about this really know your customer idea, it strikes me as something that I've told clients for many, many years now. You know, I'm a recovering data nerd. You know, I started 20 years ago as a marketing analyst and really.
Let's be real, Tony. Sorry, but you have not fully recovered.
No, I haven't. I'm working on it. You know, it's I've been working at it for a long time. It's probably never going to happen because I love the data. The data shows us so much great stuff. But one of the things I noticed in that is almost every time you put data out there first and you don't look at the humanity, that the behaviors, the emotions that caused the decisions that created those metrics, you lose something. And that's why, we're advocates of the technology, the way, AI, machine learning, a lot of these other tools are coming into play. But if you put them in place and expect to disconnect your human aspect or the humanity of your company from it, and you think that your customers are going to be able to do everything themselves, we're not there yet. And I don't know that we ever will be there completely. It's not good to make predictions like that, but I think the really know your customer aspect of this is understanding who your customers. Data can tell you a lot about your customer, but it does not help you to know your customer. There's a difference in that intimacy, in that shared experience that an employee and a customer has on the phone or on the front lines, or in your case with the client advisory boards, when the CEO, your client, is sitting there in the room listening to the CIOs of their clients or the chief marketing officers of their clients, and they have this human to human connection. It's not just about reading a report and data. It's about getting deeper into understanding who are these people in front of me, and what is it that matters to them as human beings, not just as robots or gears in a machine. What is it that matters to them? Because it's their emotions, it's their decisions, it's their behaviors, it's stuff outside of work that's affecting them. And you and I talk about this in the book, and I love this idea. Even in B2B, we're not doing business with other businesses. We're doing business with people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, another thing that strikes me along those lines is, there are some companies out there where the CEO has been the customer. And we have a story about that in our book, the story of IBM, where Lou Gerstner was the customer and then he became the CEO, and he saw and understood at a deep level what those issues are. And we have a guest on our show, Nick Ripplinger. He's the CEO of BattleSight Technologies, which is a company that develops technologies for the warfighter on the ground. And he's an Army veteran, and he understands these issues at a very, very deep level. It's a super big advantage if you're the CEO and you had been the customer. But if that's not your case, how can you get as close to being the actual customer yourself and understand what it feels like to be that customer? And so I'm looking forward to sharing that interview with Nick, because that's a whole different perspective when you've actually been the customer. Because if, it's somebody that hasn't had that experience, it's going to be really hard to fully understand it, but you sure can get close if you just talk to your customers and really listen to what they're saying and try to put yourself in their shoes.
And that really brings us to a topic that we talked about in profitability. And I know one that you're very passionate about is the idea of unfiltered listening. So share with me a little bit your perspective of unfiltered listening and how that plays out, because where I see that taking us is into a lot of the conversations. And one of those is our conversation with Carrie Hoffman, who talks about customer centricity at a level that very few people talk about it. I mean, she is talking about the customer's mindset, and to listen to her talk through what that means and what digital transformation means. It's not about the technology. I mean, yes, the technology's there, but she's talking about the mindset of the customer being transformed and how you need to think about your business. So take us through what unfiltered listening means to you and how that plays out.
Yeah. So in the book, we talk about this concept of unfiltered listening. And every little kid ever in the history of man has played the game of telephone, where you whisper in somebody's ear, they take that message, they tell the next person. Everybody understands the game of telephone and how the message comes out on the other end completely different when it's filtered through all these different lenses and biases and prisms of people interpreting the message. And so what we propose is that, particularly at the executive level, they need to have a mindset of unfiltered listening, where they themselves are hearing directly from the customers, not having it filtered through lots of people. And sometimes it's intended, sometimes it's not, where the message just gets completely distorted before it gets up to the guy who has to make decisions, guy or gal, who has to make decisions based on that input. So an example I can share with you is one of our clients had asked us to come in and talk to their sales team as a kickoff for the customer advisory board. And they wanted their sales team to make nominations of people that we should consider asking to be on the board. And most of them were very excited. They wanted their customers on this board. They thought it would be great. But there was one particular salesperson who was pushing back real hard in front of the group. No, my clients don't have time for that. They're busy people. I know what they're thinking. I can tell you what they're thinking. No, we don't need to do that. They're just not going to want to do that. And she protested too much. And it was clear that there was something going on there. So the leadership team dug into it, reached out to that client, and found out that what they were hearing from the salesperson was not at all the reality in the mind of the client. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, sometimes that's, it's a natural thing to inject your own views around some feedback. But in this case, I think it was a little bit different than that. And she was trying to basically protect herself, her job, whatever, and which did not work out well, because, once you find out what's really going on with the customer, who are you going to believe? Right. So in that case, it was just really important for the leadership team to get to the real heart of what's going on with the customers. Because as I said, that's how they base decisions. And, if you're going to make good decisions, you have to have good data, and the data is coming directly from the customer at that point.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that stands out for me is that when we go listen to customers, we're listening for kind of what's between the lines, if you will. It's the why of the customer. Now, people might be familiar with the book that Simon Sinek wrote about, know your why. And if you take that from the business context into the consumer context, every consumer has a why, and it's that thing that drives them, that very deep psychological need or desire that they have. And if we understand that, and we understand our customers at that level, we really have that knowledge, then we can pivot our business when it requires it. And I think of an example of a client that I had 3 years ago, and they were a manufacturing company that sold primarily through distributors. And most of them were mom and pop shops that they sold through. And this distributor said, we need to go online. We need to be able to sell our product direct to the consumer. And we went through and began to dive into, and I had long conversations with the CEO. We brought in the customer feedback. I walked him through it step by step, literally having him read the feedback with me so he could see what was really happening and see where I was kind of going in my mindset. So he began to develop that ability to, as we call it, the profit ability. He could see what the customers were actually saying between the words that they were using. What's that emotional tone? What was their why behind it? And as a result, they shifted. Now a vast majority of their sales are online. And they're actually now, I just talked with them the other day, and they're making a bigger move in that direction because they're understanding even more of what their customers want and what the why is behind their customers. And they're shifting markets. So they're actually attracting an entirely new set of customers because they understand that why so much better. And so I think that this idea of really knowing your customer, of unfiltered listening and getting to the why, that emotional reason, that desire that's deep within us as human beings, that's what really matters.
And the flip side is true. I just had this thought occur to me that the customers really need to get to know you as well. This is a two-way street, two-way communication. And it just sparked a thought of, this was several years ago. We were in an advisor board meeting, and there was this one gentleman that kind of frosty guy, and kind of liked to be the smartest guy in the room, and kind of act like he would rather be anywhere else, and just not a warm, fuzzy, kind of a prickly guy. And so in our boards, what we do is do rolling terms, so that we bring people on, we roll people off. So there's some continuity, but there's also new ideas being injected into the conversation. So at this point, it was time for this gentleman to be rolled off. They did a little ceremony, thanked him for serving on the board, gave him a plaque, all that kind of stuff. And this little prickly guy ended up in tears. And he said, I love this company. I'm invested in the success of this company. I love knowing what's going on. I love being able to influence, and the fact that they had this customer just begging to be a part of their internal team, so to speak. And they really got to know one another. It was just really magical. And then as the story goes on, and I swear I'm not making this up, another person on the board, a woman, she's like, wait, when do I roll off? I have to roll off this board. And then she got all upset, and it was like, there's not enough Kleenex for this boardroom of executive leaders. But it was just a really cool thing to see when you start to get to know your customers and they start to really get to know you. Then you have loyalty and advocacy and marketing opportunities to do things together, to leverage those customer relationships. And there's so much depth to these relationships that just build sustainability and security and long-term relationships that can make or break a company, quite honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of our guests, Tracy, touches on an element of this that really makes a difference, I think. And that is, Tracy was a designer for 27 years, if I remember correctly, and designing products that we all have used for big companies like Costco and Target and others out there. And she made a really interesting point. And it's the value of knowing your customer and really knowing your customer and the why behind it, because she said that often customers don't know what they want. Now, let me clarify what I mean by that. It's not that they don't know that they want something. They really do want something better, but they can't necessarily imagine what it would look like or what it would be like. And so when you understand their why, that deep driving force within them, and when you have these relationships like you're describing on this executive, boards, then you can really get into understanding, okay, they say they want X. This is their goal. This is the outcome they want to achieve. But I understand that the reason they want to achieve that is because they want to feel this particular way and experience this particular thing. So how can I help them achieve that goal, have that feeling, but maybe do it in a way that they least expect? Do it in a way that is more efficient, more effective, more impactful. And so she talks about her design experience in that. And then she goes on to talk about how now she runs a company called Bodoh and how they have worked with over 300 different brands to create a very customized podcast for each and every one of them. And so I think it's really important, as you really know your customer, you know what they want, you know why they want it. You also know that what they're asking for may not be the thing that's actually going to help them achieve their goal.
Exactly. I thought that in the conversation with Tracy, I thought that was so insightful. And she was talking about the multiple layers of people that you have, of customers that you have, particularly in the field that she was in, where you had, the purchaser, you had designers or architects or whatever, and you have store owners, and you just have this whole big chain of people that have to be pleased in this product development. And when you have that many customers with differing agendas, so to not agendas in the bad sense, but different outcomes that they're looking for, it can get very complicated. And you have to understand all along the chain. You have to understand what their motivations and what their whys are.
Absolutely. So I hope this podcast, at least this first episode, has gotten you a little bit intrigued, excited, and interested to come back and to listen to some of the interviews we have with our guests, because I think you're going to pull a lot out of this. I know every interview we have, I've pulled a lot out, and I've been doing this for a very long time. I know Betsy's been doing it as long as I have, and she as well has had some aha moments in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's so fun. We are having so much fun having these conversations, but we know that before we say hello to our guests, we know we're going to walk away with something concrete that could really enhance our businesses. But the key to that is not just hearing it. The key then is to take action on it. And so we're excited about some things that we're putting in place to help you, the listeners, take action on what you hear in these podcast episodes. And I think when you come along the ride with us on this podcast, I think you'll be glad you did. I think you'll have some really big insights, particularly now as the world is changing much more to a digital world. How do you do that? How do you build those relationships? How do you get to really know your customers when you may not be able to sit across from a table from them for the short term or the long term, depending on how, some of the recent happenings in the business world, depending on how that all plays out long term, there's going to be a lot to learn. And a lot of people have, a big nut to crack in terms of figuring it out. And so our guests will help everyone do that when it comes to really knowing your customer.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.